For more than 4 decades, Jim Carrey had the whole world laughing like his energy would never run out. But behind that electric smile and those wild performances was a man carrying pain way deeper than anyone ever guessed. At 61, Jim Carrey finally stopped pretending and opened up about the truth. Fans had felt it for years, that every joke, every over-the-top face, every legendary moment came from a lifetime of hurt he never escaped. He didn't just wake up funny one day. The man people labeled a comedy genius was already fighting heavy battles long before Hollywood ever knew his name. Before the fame, before the money, before the spotlight, Jim Carrey was just a scared kid growing up in Newmarket, Ontario, trying to survive. Born on January 17, 1962, he was the youngest of 4 kids in a household where humor wasn't about fun, it was about getting through the day. His father, Percy, once dreamed of being a saxophone player, but life shut that door fast. After years of struggle, Percy settled for stability, working as an accountant at Titan Wheels. Thinking the family was finally safe, that safety didn't last. In the mid-1970s, when Jim was only 12, Percy lost the job that kept everything together. One moment, they were barely holding on. The next, their world collapsed. Bills stacked up nonstop, stress filled the house, and Percy sent out over 70 job applications, all rejected without mercy. Eventually, Percy took janitorial work for just $4 an hour. It wasn't just a pay cut, it was a crushing blow to his pride. From respect to survival, the fall was brutal, and the family felt every second of it. By 1974, the Carrey family lost their home entirely. They moved into a small, yellow Volkswagen camper parked near Lake Ontario. Jim and his brother slept in a tent outside, dealing with freezing Canadian nights, waking up with frost on their blankets, then washing up in gas station sinks before school. That's not childhood, that's survival mode. Those years changed him forever. That's when Jim learned how to turn pain into performance, not for applause, but to stay sane. At just 13, he started practicing faces and voices in the mirror. Not because he wanted attention, but because it helped him forget the hunger, the fear, and the exhaustion. After school, he worked 8-hour shifts cleaning factory floors, then came home drained, only to do it all over again the next day. His mother, Kathleen, was chronically ill and emotionally fragile, often stuck in bed and dependent on pain medication. Jim later remembered sitting at the dinner table as she casually talked about death, telling her kids she might not be around much longer. For a boy already drowning in chaos, that fear never loosened its grip. He became quiet, angry, and constantly scared of losing his parents. But at the same time, comedy became his armor, the one thing keeping him upright. At just 10 years old, Jim mailed a letter to Carol Burnett, believing his impressions could be his way out. When she sent back a kind acknowledgement, he taped it to his wall like proof that escape was possible. But the real truth is, Jim Carrey wasn't chasing fame, he was running from despair. A darkness filled with rejection, failure, and years of feeling invisible, a weight that followed him long before he ever became a star. By 15, the pressure was crushing. Carrying his family's poverty forced him to grow up way too fast. After long nights scrubbing factory floors alongside his father and siblings, he'd stumble into school exhausted, wearing the same worn clothes, dodging classmates who mocked him for being broke. Eventually, it all became too much. At 16, he dropped out of high school. Percy cried when he heard the news, but he didn't stop him. Jim later admitted he sometimes wished his father had fought harder for him, but Percy was already beaten down by life. That moment changed everything. With nothing left to lose, Jim decided to take comedy seriously, or as seriously as a kid with almost nothing could. His first real break came when his father set up a performance at Toronto's Yuck Yucks Comedy Club. Jim showed up wearing a stiff polyester suit that his mother thought looked sharp and professional. The crowd absolutely hated it. He got booed off the stage, fast and loud. Most young performers would have folded right there, embarrassed and done for good. Jim didn't. That humiliation didn't crush him, it lit a fire under him. 2 years later, he came back different. The suit was gone, his hair was wild, and his energy was raw and fearless. He performed like someone who had nothing left to lose, no mask, no safety net. That night, the audience finally laughed with him, not at him. At 19, Jim packed up what little he had and left Canada for Los Angeles with barely $200 in his pocket. He crashed on friends' couches, survived off free meals from comedy clubs, and grabbed any stage that would let him touch a microphone. Every night, he imagined a future where success didn't feel impossible. He would drive up to Mulholland Drive and visualize himself winning, thriving, finally safe. He wasn't chasing fame or flashy money. What he wanted was security, something he'd never had growing up. But Hollywood didn't roll out the red carpet. Jim faced rejection non-stop, including multiple failed auditions for Saturday Night Live across the early 1980s and mid-80s. One audition tape didn't even make it to producer Lorne Michaels. Still, the bitterness never swallowed him. Instead, Jim rebuilt himself on stage, creating exaggerated characters, twisted facial expressions, and a chaotic unpredictability that nobody else could copy. Those early years didn't make Jim Carrey famous. They made him tough. Every no only sharpened the survival instincts he learned as a kid. Living in a van teaches you one thing fast. You keep showing up even when the world acts like you don't exist. His long-awaited turning point finally arrived in the early 1990s, but success didn't come softly. It came in loud, reckless, full-speed chaos. After nearly 10 years grinding in small clubs and taking low-paying TV roles, Jim got invited by legendary comedian Rodney Dangerfield to open for him on tours. That opportunity put him in front of bigger crowds and helped him fine-tune the wild physical style that would soon change comedy forever. Still, the real breakthrough hit in 1990 when he joined the sketch comedy show In Living Color. Surrounded by the Wayans family and a cast stacked with sharp comedic minds, Jim became the unexpected standout. His characters, especially Fire Marshal Bill, were unhinged, reckless, and unlike anything TV had ever seen. What millions of viewers didn't realize was that every twisted grin and extreme movement came from a man who learned to turn emotional pain into pure spectacle. With success came a dangerous intensity. Jim pushed his body to the limit, gaining and losing weight for roles, slamming into props, and performing movements so extreme they bordered on self-destruction. He regularly walked off sets, bruised and aching, his body paying the price for the chaos he unleashed. Castmates described Jim Carrey as brilliant but draining, an unstoppable force who didn't just perform comedy, he burned through it completely. Behind closed doors, the pressure pushed him toward cocaine, Adderall, and Valium, using anything he could to stay upright. The fame he once dreamed about on Mulholland Drive slowly turned into a cage he wasn't prepared to live inside. Then came 1994, the year everything detonated. In just 12 months, Jim released Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. All three exploded worldwide, pulling in hundreds of millions and locking him in as Hollywood's most bankable comedy star. Studios chased him non-stop, and by 1996, he made history as the first actor ever paid $20 million for a comedy role. But beneath the box office madness, his personal life was cracking fast. His marriage to Melissa Womer, who knew him long before the fame, collapsed under brutal schedules, late nights, and emotional swings. He was at the absolute peak of his career while losing grip on the man he used to be. Jim had finally become the superstar he imagined as a struggling teenager, but the cost was stacking quietly and painfully. As the spotlight grew hotter, grief, legal stress, and emotional breakdowns followed close behind. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, the applause got louder, but the darkness behind it grew heavier. In public, he was the unstoppable box office king. In private, his world was slowly falling apart. Jim lost both of his parents during the same years he became a household name. His mother passed away in 1991, just as Hollywood began noticing him. His father died 3 years later in 1994. The same year, Jim became a megastar. Jim later revealed he slipped a $10 million check into his father Percy's suit pocket at the funeral, calling it a full-circle moment for the boy who once lived in a van. But no amount of money could fill the emptiness they left behind. Their deaths carved wounds that never fully healed. His relationships continued to suffer. After divorcing Melissa Womer, Jim remarried actress Lauren Holly, but the marriage barely lasted a year. Jim admitted he could no longer connect emotionally. Fame, nonstop work, and unresolved childhood trauma made stability nearly impossible. a clear pattern emerged over time. He craved closeness, then suddenly needed total isolation. Even Renee Zellweger, whom he once called the love of his life, watched their relationship collapse under the same internal chaos he didn't yet know how to explain. Then, in 2015, Jim faced the most devastating moment of his adult life. His former girlfriend, Catriona White, died by suicide. She left a note referencing him, and within months, her estranged husband and mother accused Jim of providing the substances involved in her death. Lawsuits followed, alleging negligence and emotional harm. Jim fought back, countersuing and stating the accusations were an attempt to exploit his fame. The situation pushed him deeper into isolation, marking a breaking point that would permanently change how the world saw him and how he saw himself. The legal battle dragged on until 2018, when all charges were dismissed. But the emotional damage didn't just vanish. Catriona White's death ripped open wounds Jim had carried since childhood: fear of loss, crushing guilt, and a deep belief that he somehow brought pain to the people he loved. From the outside, fans only saw him drifting away from Hollywood, but behind closed doors, the truth was much darker. He was unraveling under the weight of grief, guilt, and a lifelong fight with despair. Depression, identity loss, and constant inner battles had been haunting Jim Carrey for years. Behind the fame, the laughter, and the wild performances, he was hiding a reality he kept buried for decades. Jim later admitted he had been battling depression since the 1980s. While the world saw a man who could twist his face, bend his body, and light up any room, Jim felt something completely different. He described it as a low-level despair that never fully left, always sitting in the background, no matter how successful he became. Medication softened the worst of it, but it also flattened everything else. He said life on it made everything feel just okay. And eventually he realized that just okay was its own kind of prison. When he finally stopped taking it, he explained he would rather feel pain than feel nothing at all. That darkness didn't appear out of nowhere. Jim grew up terrified of losing the people he loved. He watched his mother struggle with depression, illness, and dependency on medication. As a kid, he remembered locking himself in the bathroom, crying, convinced his parents would die from smoking. Those fears never left him. Years later, Catriona White's death pulled all of that back to the surface. It wasn't just grief, it was the return of a belief he'd carried since childhood that he wasn't enough to save the people he loved. At the same time, his sense of identity started slipping. His extreme method acting in Man on the Moon pushed him into dangerous mental territory. He stayed in character as Andy Kaufman for months, on and off set. Friends said they barely recognized him anymore. After filming ended, Jim confessed it took him a full month to remember who he was. And even then, he wasn't sure the answer was real. He spiraled into massive questions. Who is Jim Carrey? Who is anyone? Is personality real, or just a mask we wear? By 2017, he shocked the internet, saying the self doesn't exist, that identity itself is an illusion. People laughed and mocked him, but he meant every word. Between depression, loss, lawsuits, and suffocating fame, Jim felt like the version of himself the world loved was just a costume he couldn't keep wearing. Painting and meditation became his lifeline, the only places where he didn't have to perform or explain himself. Jim Carrey wasn't rejecting Hollywood. He was trying to survive. By the early 2020s, Jim was no longer the man who dominated Hollywood in the 1990s. His career slowed, not because his talent faded, but because the industry lost its magic for him. Corporate franchises, committee-driven scripts, and marketing-heavy movies drained the creativity that once saved his life. Acting had always been his escape, a way to turn pain into meaning. And when that stopped feeling real, he had no choice but to step back and find peace on his own terms. But that escape no longer felt clean or safe. Acting, the thing that once saved him, now felt compromised. Jim began turning down roles, disappearing for long stretches into solitude, painting alone in his studio, and replaying the chaos that shaped his life. Still, he wasn't fully done yet. In 2020, Sonic the Hedgehog reignited public interest in Jim Carrey, and the studio pushed hard for sequels. They even printed the script in real 24-karat gold ink. Jim joked publicly, saying he did it because I bought a lot of stuff. But the truth ran deeper. Acting still carried a small spark for him, a reminder of who he used to be. This time, though, he refused to trade his sanity for it. After a near-fatal pneumonia scare in 2017, Jim was forced to slow down and face how fragile life really is. That moment cracked something open. By the time he turned 61, he finally started telling the truth out loud. What fans had suspected for years was real. Behind the manic brilliance was a man shaped by poverty, fear, loss, depression, and decades of pretending everything was fine. Jim admitted he spent most of his life feeling like an imposter in his own body. Laughter became his disguise, a way to hide wounds no one could see. He spoke openly about his father's suicide attempt, his own breaking point, and the spiritual journey that helped him realize he was more than the roles he played, and far less than the persona the world forced onto him. Jim Carrey's confession wasn't a scandal. It wasn't some flashy reveal made for headlines. It was just the truth that the man who made millions laugh had been hurting quietly for most of his life. And in finally saying it out loud, he found something he'd never fully known before: peace. Jim Carrey spent a lifetime making the world laugh while fighting battles most people never saw. After hearing his story, what part of his journey shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories from Forgotten Stardom, uncovering the hidden lives behind Hollywood's biggest icons.